So, brother, tell the people here in Washington, D.C., where they'll be hearing this show, who are you? What do you do? Just tell them a little about yourself first.
I am Yonela Mnana. So Yonela is my name. My last name is Mnana. I play piano. I'm not playing as well. And I sing as well. I am a jazz scholar as well. I just submitted my master's thesis.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very much interested in South African music, especially jazz and jazz piano also in particular, because it denotes certain activities that actually have been happening in South Africa, not just inside, but as a reaction or even a connection to other stimuluses, because I think the very fact that we got colonized meant that we're always going to be attached to the outside world, that is, to the other parts of the world that are not South Africa in themselves. So yeah, that's it. I've got a project that I call Baba. That's the one that's out, which was a journey where I was moving slightly out of your contemporary music, and also I was just playing the jazz tunes that obviously will be reeking of a lot of South African indigenous sound.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
what's the name of the project? And what's the name of the project?
It's Baba. It's B-A-B-A.
Baba. Where can folks find it on iTunes or Amazon?
Baba, yeah, it's iTunes, Amazon also, and what's the other thing? Google Play.
Okay, Google Play. Great.
So, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And Baba is much easier to remember because it's like, it means father, as an opposite to mama.
Uh-huh.
So mama and then the father, Baba.
Baba, yeah. Beautiful. So now,
Baba, yeah.
the show today is about Hugh Masekela. It's called Hugh Masekela, Jazz Warrior, and it just kind of introduces the topic of South African jazz. How do you feel like you've been influenced by Hugh Masekela, or how do you feel, what's his importance to South Africa and specifically to Black folks in South Africa?
Mm-hmm. I mean, Hugh is a towering figure, and actually you got to really find out more about his stature through some of the interviews that people like Heavy Hancock did with some of the records in South Africa. How Hugh has impacted them as a classmate and as a fellow guy, but as a South African, Hugh helped us to actually embrace ourselves, because a lot of jazz compositions initially would be kind of like a relearning of some of the American jazz standards and compositions that are similar to those. But Hugh and all the other people that Hugh went to America with, like the Union of South Africa, so that includes Abdullah Ibrahim and Kefas. He's bold enough to actually just sing the folk songs here. That is not just the sound, but also the fact that he uses a lot of vernacular languages here. So that now, when we compose, we know that we can't be limited, and also we can't kind of like lose that whole self-worth by also respecting other things. Sure, is important to South Africa in a sense that he was clear about what he was advocating. At the time, he was actually advocating for the regime change in South Africa.
Yeah.
We have been so much under apartheid and anyway so much under even colonization.
Mm-hmm.
Mentally and spiritually, it was harder to move. So he made us proud in that way, and in the sense that he was not just prepared to articulate them, but that he took the position of ambassadorship
Mm-hmm.
on our behalf to go and do what he and Miriam and Abdullah Ibrahim did. It's very interesting how Hugh and all the other folks, they had to wear one of the first jazz albums to be recorded in South Africa in 1959, I think, if I'm not mistaken. They called themselves the Jazz Epistles.
Right.
And they were still in South Africa at the time. So it was him and Abdullah Ibrahim, Elijah Mabuza on drums, and Jonas Kwangwa, and Kipi Mwekit, one of the other 10 saxophone players that were actually, he was also known as Charlie Parker in here. So, and what he did, because they were young that time, they were 17, 18. They actually just got together and just played hard bop straight away.
Yeah.
And it was interesting if you check the track record of his music. It always is different from one ensemble to the other.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, you went further even to, take for example the song Stimela,
right,
which most people do. He even included a lot of, he put some verse before the song itself, because he talked about how the train would bring mine workers from all the other countries, forcibly so,
mm-hmm.
to come and dig some gold and whatever, because Hugh is from the eastern part of South Africa, which is Mpumalanga,
mm-hmm.
and that's where it's also called the Malahleni because there's a lot of coal. In fact, even now, our main power station is around there. So he was proud enough not just to do South African, but to allow himself to do a kind of an autobiographic, musicalization in a way, to be able to talk about him. And then he proceeded also to play great.
Yes.
One of the greatest trumpet players in our country.
So just two little questions then. So Stimela means train, yes?
Stimela means train.
In what language?
I suspect that Stimela, I could say it's a generically vernacular language.
Okay.
To everybody. Stimela is not, because the train is a foreign thing.
Got it.
I suspect that they got it from the fact that there was a steam engine or something.
Okay.
It got to be called Stimela. Even in Soto, in Xhosa, and everywhere, there is that notion of Stimela.
Okay.
I actually remember reading some other writer who was actually concentrating in her PhD on the notion that lots of South African musicians tend to write about, mobile things, about the journeys, from, for example, this one, Stimela, and also I know Paul Hemner wrote about Trace Dow, and then Miriam Makeba wrote about Umbombela, which is also another name for Stimela. It's interesting how. So, that also it shows us another thing, because most of the jazz sounds that we get to listen to, either they talk about the place there, but it's not many people that are writing about just being mobile and moving from one place to the other.
Mm-hmm.
And the Stimela also just shows, it depicts what is happening at the time,
Well, do you think that out of all the trumpet players, because he seems to be a part of the jazz trumpet lineage, who would you say he seems by his sound to be most influenced by?
No, Hugh writes there in his autobiography. There's that he co-wrote with Michael Cheers.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote that he was so much in love with Clifford Brown.
Okay, Clifford.
So much so that when he was actually in the States, he went to seek out his teacher, Clifford Brown's teacher. I mean, well, he also indicates that I don't know if the teacher showed what he was doing to teach him, but clearly, I mean, it became clear to Hugh that Clifford Brown was actually unique, that it wasn't solely just dependent as much as it was affected by the teacher. So, yes, he was so much in love with Clifford Brown, but generally, in South Africa, there's a culture of music listening that is not necessarily centered around the one person. So, I'm sure he obviously, in fact,
he sounds a lot like Miles to me. I mean, what do you think?
I think he met Miles when he went to America. He met Miles, and Miles liberated him in a way. And Miles was saying, "No, I hope you don't want to be a statistic.
Right.
So just take your stuff and mix it with our stuff, and then you be unique." So he was very blunt with him.
Yeah, he did say that. Sure.
That was able to help Hugh or reorientate himself in his music, and he did just that. Yeah, I think the whole attitude of revolting against the regime would necessarily come out in the sound as much in the same way that Miles did, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it was the same era, the 60s, and I suspect it wouldn't be a very far-fetched thing to liken him to Miles.
Yeah, he sounds like a lot like him. I was just kind of listening to him a lot, just researching for the show, and I was like, wow, this sound very much like them. You know, just for folks who are listening, Yonela just shared he's a jazz musician, pianist, scholar. The man is a jazz scholar, and over this past year, I met him when I was in Johannesburg last April. And I was just amazed with the beauty of the song that he's performed many songs, but it was one kind of rendition of a song called Zaire that he played. And please go to Ethnomusicology in Action. And then I've uploaded just a snippet of that recording. I hope you don't mind, brother, to give you all a little taste, so you can find him. I hope you record that arrangement because it is awesome. I want to ask you something about, so folks, just before I ask him, the man has been, guiding me in my studies about South African jazz. So he's an authority. He told me all about, the Hugh Masekela autobiography, and we've had extensive conversations on the relationship between, Black American jazz, South African jazz, the African roots of jazz and how it kind of calls out and reaches to our people over there. So we're going to talk much more about that on some upcoming shows. So now I want to ask, brother, first, how long have you been playing the piano? And that's one part of the question. And then another kind of unrelated part. Let me ask two related questions. How long have you been playing? And do you feel that Bra Hugh has been a direct influence on your music that you've been making?
I've been playing piano. I think I started learning it around, I think around 2001, where there was a school band, but it was quite late, so I went to varsity to play, and I used to do to play classical music, but I realized because I can't see the problem of just because someone had to actually just record it, so I think it was great. But I just realized if I had to do concert piano, it's going to be a problem. Jazz has been much more of a natural step for me to go through it because it's been around me in all its different forms. I mean, obviously there's a commercial soul and R&B that we get to hear all, about all the radios and other music playing devices. So, Hugh, the first time I actually got to hear seriously, to listen to Hugh's music was in 1996 when I was in grade 7. And I remember for us, that time, that was when the CD player got sold in South Africa. And I got access to the CD player and to actually the album. There's an album called African, what is it? Hope. It's called Hope. It's got that song called Marketplace.
Oh, okay, right.
It's a live album.
Yep.
It's beautiful.
Yep.
So I actually liked it because I felt it was almost like every time I played it, it's like they hear. It's like they're performing for me again and again and again. And I liked it because it had other songs in it. That song, Bring Back Nelson Mandela, that was also in another musical called Sarafina, which he actually did the music for. So I played that CD on end like countless times. So I believe that, apart from all the other people that I like to incorporate in the music, Hugh's influence was more subliminal. It was, he's there, he's always been there. For us, when you talk about Hugh, it's not, you don't have to actually ask who Hugh is, because he's there and he allows himself to, to be seen like that. And for many other people, unlike a lot of other musicians, he has always stayed fresh, literally, in terms of his health, in terms of his life, in terms of his utterances. I know, for example, I'm going to be irrelevant, but there is one of the well-known statements when he was, commenting about ladies' hair, the fact that.
Oh yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. He made those really strong statements toward the end. Like, what do you think about that?
Yes.
What is the statement?
Well, he was basically commenting on the fact that there is a tendency of liking this other exported human hair, and that there's like Brazilians and the other kinds of weaves actually.
Weaves.
So, and he was saying, it surprises him that people would claim to be Pan-African while coveting to use somebody else's hair, which also betrays the fact that there's kind of like a unconscious desire to be something other than what they've got.
Right.
And in fact, I had a comment that was related to it by someone who was saying, oh, no, there was a joke. This guy was trying to sell African hair to people. No one wanted to buy that. So,
that's right. I think Chris Rock did that in his I can't remember the movie. That's right. He sure did.
Yeah. So and he was very, very unapologetic about that, because he just doesn't understand, what it means. But also, it's a worrying thing in that most black people, I suppose, and like all the other impoverished people, are suffering under the strain of consumerism, commercialism, where we are.
Yeah, he talked about that.
To covet something that we don't have generally, and something that is someone else's culture, something that would take even the small fortunes that we have to go and acquire those things.
He said, I was looking at a few of the interviews, he said that black folks are spending worldwide, I think, $100 billion or $100 million on hair products alone. So, he definitely was using his platform to champion, I guess, a cultural reclamation for black people, a self-love maybe. What was some other, he was quite outspoken especially seemingly in those latter years. I mean, how did people react to him in South Africa? I mean, what did you all think?
Well, I mean, I'm sure. I think there has been kind of like a defensive thing, obviously from most ladies, but otherwise, a lot of people kind of like understood.
Yeah.
But I mean, I suppose when someone comments on something that you really, really take personal,
Right. Right.
It's interesting. I mean, there's obviously the other things that even the clothes that we wear are something else. The kind of language we use is someone else's.
Right, sure.
You know, so you can have a slippery slope argument that says, okay, you want to be African? Come on, let's go and get the skins, get your traditional instrument, speak your language, and just stay in your lane. I suppose, I think there was that kind of reaction. But also I was thinking, as you were still asking me, that Hugh is from the generation of those people that would echo. People like Miriam Makeba, who actually who stayed with him. People like Abdullah Ibrahim, they're very, very vocal about very important things that have to do with our identity.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just that he was the one that was also he's got more publicity.
Yeah.
But also that was more outspoken. Just he's like that. He, you know.
Yeah.
Also that there's another thing with where artists most jazz artists tend to like want to be in that little corner and to try and be, you know, mysterious. And that brings me also to another issue of most people when they decide to play piano or to play whatever instrument, they just do it because it's an art thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I find in South Africa that we tend to do art simply because we are trying to do something through it, where not for its own sake. Almost as though, you know, the situations that we find ourselves in kind of leads us to be artists.
Well, what do you mean by that? Can you give an example?
I'm saying most of the time when say for example when I write my music, I think a lot about, you know, about our people, about certain things that I hear that need to be, you know, commented upon, that we need to kind of advocate for.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's different from someone that can just go and write about the tree or the great Danube. I think, you understand, there's really, really different, because it means that person has a luxury of just reflecting on something. But we comment on stuff that is very, very personal to us.
Well, I think
which means
we have a different, I mean, that's our positionality. You know, we as Black folks throughout the world have a completely different position than other people. And so, of course, our work is going to serve different purposes, and we're going to use it to discuss the important things, or the things that are important to us. So now that brings me to another question, just generally about the political climate, you know, in South Africa. You know, there's some serious things going down. I mean, this spring, some other colleagues in our graduate school, we got word that there is a land distribution thing or redistribution thing happening, and I was elated. You know, some colleagues were elated, and some people were, you know, I just think that there's such justice in that. But how is that being received, you know, in Joburg where you live, and you know, what is the reaction to that?
No, the land question is a very, very, very problematic thing, a very sore thing to a lot of Black people here. But the way it's brought, the way it came through was that initially there was a political party called, it's still there, the Economic, what is it, Economic Freedom,
Mm-hmm.
it's not a freedom fund, but it's the acronym is the EFF. So they have centered themselves as kind of like this organization that's going to fight for the economic liberation of black people, because
Mm-hmm.
we've got the democrats we were able to have to be in positions of power
Mm-hmm.
in a way. But it soon became clear that we just free in name only. The majority, 90% of the wealth is still in the hands of white people who are, like maybe just under 5% of the whole population, or maybe let's say 10. My statistics are not quite clear, but then it just worries one that how can so much wealth that in a country where there's so many people that don't have money
Mm-hmm.
be concentrated in very in few hands of white people. So when it came, the ANC, which is the political party that came into power, just before they elected the new leader, they began to appropriated that concept, which anyway they had claimed, because the land was supposed to be distributed anyway. It was kind of like a distant main goal, but it kind of went to the back burner. So they think that's one way of them to kind of like get popularity and get votes. So and then it soon got into Parliament this year that we need to make sure that there's going to be appropriation without compensation. Because what they used to do was to get, if for example there's a white farmer that has land that needs to be returned, they would kind of like negotiate with them and pay them something so that they can return the land. So now there's this argument that no, land must actually be appropriated without any payment, because otherwise it's like the government is going to be held in ransom.
Yeah,
So, but now the people are backed up in technicalities. They try to check whether it's constitutional anymore. So it's they're trying to put it down, because I think they think it might actually scare the investors and whatever people who are actually the ones that are stealing our wealth here. And it's a pity that there is such a concentration and a prioritization of investors in place of the general, public that and whose interest must be actually taken first. So yes,
and that's
it's still in motion, but it's not yet enacted.
Okay, so the law has not been enacted. I remember hearing Brother Hugh mention, several things. That's one of the things he said. He said, we don't own the country. He said, I think he said that all of the land of the country is owned by 3% of the whites, or the whites, that kind of thing. And I think, unfortunately, that's the circumstance most definitely here in the United States.
I think it's even more painful in the sense that because they hold the vast majority of the land, we get concentrated in small townships where I think also it infringes on the self-esteem of black people, because then we forced to kind of like sleep together in very, very small rooms.
So,
and it's not easy to kind of get your self-respect.
Okay, so wait, I gotta ask you this. It's not to be rude.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
and like we learn about apartheid, how, black people were forced into townships, communities were forcibly relocated. So is this still the same situation then, where black folks are still can only live in certain places? Is it like racial discrimination where, black people are not allowed to rent or buy in certain places, or is it just kind of by default the other places are so expensive? What's the story with that?
It's the thing about us is it's racial capitalization. So we black people have been dispossessed in a sense that they have been economically disadvantaged. And even when we got power, that disadvantage stayed there because there's no economic liberation. So they enacted laws that would separate us in terms of space. The fact that they took black people have to travel long distances to go to work. So even the money that you make from work goes back to the transport system, which in fact even in itself is not good enough. So that status, people are still allowed to buy a house. But how are they going to buy houses if the system still oppresses them, still leaves them to kind of eke out their own? It's like, that whole story of the idea, the narrative of the rags to riches thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like the one that can manage to put the little bit that he can make. He's the one that's going to be the survivor. So people have to make plans and either try and make money through government contracts or be criminals or something. They're not extraordinary, but the ordinary person is still going to be bound, our children and our children's children, if the state system is their way. And they're still going to be impoverished. And actually that speaks also to our music. I mean, most of the jazz musicians I know tend to play in town. But that's not where the black majority is. But because there's no economic stimulus in this, there's no way for black people to play for themselves, because, who's going to pay? Why would people come to venues to pay if they're still struggling to make money for food, It's more problematic than so there's a few that still have houses. There's a few that now people can buy houses, can rent houses, but they just need to be economically advantaged to be able to do that.
Wow. It's amazing how I know folks who are listening, over here on this side, I know you hear in what Yonela is describing, it's like a mirror, because we, Black African Americans, and then generally I think people throughout the diaspora, definitely in Brazil, are experiencing the same exact thing. Here, not to get too political on you all, but here, unfortunately, I think that Black people are blamed for not progressing economically. I guess, yes, we had a civil rights movement, which we'll cover on this show in depth, but and laws changed, and that kind of enabled some people to have opportunities that changed their family's trajectory with regards to the socioeconomic situation. But not everybody has those opportunities, and we're really kind of in the same situation in one sense.
It's going to be like that. I think we're going to be like that in the sense that if we use our system, he's going to make sure that the system suits him. It's a general basic principle.
Right.
That it's like if someone says follow the golden rule, but if he's the one that has the gold, it means you'll never be good enough.
Yeah.
They tell you, okay, if you want to define, have a good life, go to school. You go to school, you finish your school. They're like, no, if that's not enough, we can pay you a little more if you go to varsity. You go to university, and you're still not good enough. Even a professor, there's always going to be some other horizon that the system tells you don't have it, for them to finally, eventually open those doors and shake your hand like this is a big broad club. There's that kind of pyramid system.
Right.
System sets up.
And that's, go ahead.
The same way that the same way that the money is concentrated on the few hands. I think that's happening around the world.
Yeah.
And that's the status part, and that's why we kind of like one of the only things that we still have is our spirit and our sound.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, because we made to become consumers, it's even becoming more harder to make proper music and compose, because we're being bombarded about other music there's a lot of music from America that has nothing to do with us, because it doesn't even speak about the people even from that side.
Sure.
Generally, it's about somebody who's being in love, it's about sex, and about parties.
Right.
So it's almost like we're being lulled through sound to not do anything.
Right.
To wish that we were Beyonce, to wish that we were the other. There's a kind of heroism in a way that showbiz works.
Right.
The fact that we get to concentrate on one person instead of understanding things as a whole systemic effort, as a movement that's happening.
Right.
So, for example, the way the story of jazz is going, it's kind of like centered on giants. So if you're not playing like a giant or similar to him or emulating him, then it's almost like you're not good enough. So if you check it, all kind of like music appreciation books that were written by white, I mean, even about American jazz, it's almost like those guys, like Park, and it's almost like they did it alone.
Yes, right. Like they weren't a part of. You know what, brother? That is exactly why we're advocating for a different kind of music education for our children here, because people describe they're geniuses, no doubt, but they describe them as if they don't come from our culture and as if their music, like a Louis Armstrong or a Charlie Parker, are just kind of just for, outside of who they were. Louis Armstrong was a New Orleans trumpet player. Charlie Parker was a blues, Kansas City saxophonist. And I'm going to call out on the air. I'm going to call out that Ken Burns jazz documentary that kept describing Louis Armstrong as, trumpet, his music is from God. Well, that might be true, but God worked through his lineage because the brother was from New Orleans and sounds very much like there's still a jazz tradition there where fathers teach sons or uncles teach nephews how to play the horn. Just the same way he learned.
We have to understand that capitalism works in that way. It first it appropriates and it relocates. So the way that they say the music is from God, which is true, but they want the consumer not to feel connected to what could be kind of like so it's almost like they purified the blackness. They cleansed it from itself and made it a golden thing.
Right.
So, and it was not even to the benefit of those people that we talk about. It was to the benefit. There's a book called Black Music, White Business. And
did you all hear that? Black Music, White Business.
Yes.
Go ahead, brother.
Yes. So I think that's how they do it. Even, for example, I'm not an authority on basketball, but I think that's how they do it with everybody, even with Obama. They bring something that they know people would like it, and then they kind of they not clean it. It's almost, when you've got something that has maybe a scent or some grease or whatever. Now they purify it to sound kind of like universal, to sound consumable, to have no meaning.
Sure.
No, because, and then they now relocate them in the lineage of Bach and them. But
I've heard that, Right, they make it black music a part of the European continuum, when it's not. It's a part of the African continuum.
It's similar to, for example, what I'm sorry about that. I think it's similar also to those, there's people that have been trying to talk about the idea of classical jazz, which I find really disturbing.
Yeah.
Because it's almost like we're using all these yardsticks that are proposed by white people to kind of qualify ourselves. Why do we always have to wait for them to set up the stuff and allow them or feel better when we use concepts of universality or whatever? Like if someone talks about good jazz, what is good jazz? But you understand, it's almost like that. It's something that is purified, that is commercialized, that is standardized,
Yeah.
But a person's life is not standardized.
Right. And that,
The
I
more
think,
unique the music is. Go on.
but I think that also when we don't talk about music and culture, so that's our theme. The name of this show is Music in Culture, Sounds of the Black Experience. And when we do not present that's the name of our show. That's our theme. And when we do not present music in culture or as culture, then it disempowers our young people to know what they have. How is it that if they hear Louis Armstrong or Hugh Masekela, or Miriam Makeba or Charlie Parker or whoever, God is an isolated phenomenon within a national context. They'll never know I have this.
You're right. It's kind of like, for me, I find that it's like the people, they take the land. Now they take your legacy. They take things that belong to you. If, for example, the way that they would talk about Hugh, or the way that they would talk about Taka or Monk, is a way that kind of disempowers you as a learner. I know as students how we suffer when we try to study something because it sounds unattainable. But I realized after meeting the masters that local guys, Andile Nana, Fair Faku, or the great musicians, that you get the sense that, so this is actually attainable. And it's worse in South Africa in the sense that we don't see live music performed in our natural environment.
Right.
That's another way also of disposition, where you could only check the music after you went to a specific venue and sit down and be quiet and try and be smart about it. But that's not how we feel. That's not how we react. But if you can check how we react in churches and stuff.
That's right.
And I like you were commenting about how people would during my performances go on and join in singing because that's what music has always been. It's a communal experience all the time.
Right.
And it's a pity how when people do histories like that, there tends to be some other person, and who's generally white, who is actually an authority on black music. In South Africa, a lot of teachers that we have, a lot of lecturers, are white.
Yeah.
And I must say, most might understand the techniques of the music, but it's very disingenuous to want to learn your black music from someone else who's not even generally even in the field.
It goes back to positionality. Exactly. That's true. I mean, because that's going to be the approach, but it also goes back to the positionality. Who has access to the education and the wealth to gain such platforms? And that's a discussion that we have in ethnomusicology all of the time. Who has the power to speak for whom? Which is why, on this show, we bring in the voice of the folks who are making the music, the voice of the people who are experiencing the music.
And that's, it's good to have that kind of mediating attitude, because what I was about to say is that as these people become an authority on black music, and with the language they use, and the whole idea of technical acumen, which is necessary too, but it's not the only thing. And I might say it's not even at the center of it. The worst part about it is that now the other geniuses that rise up, the black people now, tend to want to subscribe and to join that kind of language, or to have the kind of attitude such that when you meet them, they behave also like untouchable geniuses, but they don't understand that this is it. I know a lot of Americans, there's some of them that really, really have love, that's great.
Right.
But some of them are not even able to talk to someone because they try to preserve that kind of like geniusness. I mean, I had the pleasure of meeting and performing a little bit with Frank McComb. And one thing that surprised me was how he was able to kind of come down to earth and just share with people.
Who
But
is
that's
this?
not the attitude. Frank McComb is like a soul keyboard player and singer.
Okay, Frank McComb. Okay, what out of New York?
He reminds me a little bit of. Yeah.
Okay.
He reminds me, more of them. And actually, that's another thing. We should come to the fact that the whole engenering or engenderization of music, of our black music, begins to make us put hierarchies on whether the music is great or not. If someone says, "Oh, is that auntie?" It's almost like it's no longer an intellectual exercise.
Right.
I find that in South Africa, we have all these things, and the more we incorporate all of them, we're able to depict who we are for sure. And it's something also we do amongst ourselves as musicians. It's almost like, oh, this one is more softer, it's more. You understand? As though it's not an experience. Black music in general, as much as jazz has managed to put our music at high pinnacle.
Right.
I believe all the music that we do, gospel, all of them, all of these black art forms, have something to say about ourselves. And then we must not actually be ashamed to appreciate and lift it up, in the same way that we want to talk. So it's almost like we have to guard against the fact that we can reinforce the same systematic disposition of our music in the language of the dispossessor.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah,
right.
It's a shared experience.
Right. So I see what you're saying. So it's like seeing and experiencing, or trying to even create our music through the perspective, the position of folks outside of the culture, even dispossesses us from our own music. Well, that's a very deep way of being colonized.
Oh no, yeah, for sure, sure, and it's very worrying in a sense that it affects in ways of how we present our music. The fact that we can only feel good enough when we make albums. Isn't there another way of can't we have an artist that just works at the hospital to cure people?
And you know what? And those folks in church, these people, so making an album, it does indicate a level of ability, but we'll never really know the broad scope of the gifts that are within our people, because there are people who are working non-performance jobs who have incredible musical abilities and making incredible music. But see, that's the point of the music being our culture. It doesn't just narrow down to just a few people.
That is why jazz is, that's why land is such an important idea, because if you want to make a performance, you still have to depend on someone else's asset, someone else's place, and subscribe to someone else's rules in terms of when and how you're going to perform.
Right.
How are we going to be able to communicate with each other if there is, barriers, if there's lots of barriers that are keeping us away from each other. Eventually we begin to believe that we're not the same.
Right.
And the idea of branding, it almost like removes you from normal.
Right.
It's good for business, but it tells us something about business itself.
Right.
In a sense that it commodifies and disembodies an artist.
Absolutely. Okay. So now let's close this out with two things. Speaking of the commodification of music, when I met you were performing with the other brothers. I saw that you all were very welcoming to everybody, no matter what their ability was. And I've experienced a lot of jazz folks over here. And, if
mm,
folks, if
mm.
you don't have the chops, you get up, then you are shunned. I mean, and I'm not
I
saying
see,
that,
I see. Mm.
but you all didn't
I
do that.
understand what you mean.
You are very welcoming.
But,
So it was like family.
mm,
So if you
mm.
could discuss, your work at the African Freedom Station. By the way, folks, it's
Mm.
in, when you go to South Africa, find it. Is it still there in Sophia Town?
They rebuilding it.
Oh, good.
They got a bigger space and
Wonderful.
they reconceptualizing. And
It's
I
in,
remember back
is it
years
Sophia
ago,
Town or Sophia Town? How do I pronounce it?
yes, it's Sophia, and well, it's called Sophia Town. I don't know. I
Okay.
think, and maybe it doesn't really much matter.
Okay.
That the guy that bought it, I think he probably dedicated to his wife Sophia, and I mean he's not a black guy anyway.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay. Okay.
with
Okay.
but Sophia Town is a very important place, in South African history
Mhm.
because it was one of the fewest cosmopolitan places where there's lots of artists and there's lots of black people, and that's where people have been removed away from, they were called dark spots in a white neighborhood. So
Mhm.
they removed a lot of artists that we knew, and I mean people like Makeba and Hugh Masekela and the others. I mean they had vocal trios, Skylarks. There was a big trend. A lot of actors come from there. A lot of
Interesting.
poets. So it was a very creative hub that they destroyed.
Right, with the
It's
forcible
interesting how.
removals.
Yes, no, it was, yeah, it's part of it. There's been books that have been written about that. I remember in Tandy Classing, who's one of the greatest singers ever that just passed, has a song on it. And it's interesting how this Steve, who's the owner, that runs the African Freedom Station, relocates and re-identifies the Sophia Town, in a way that helps us own the history. I
Right.
might go back to what you were saying about people not having chops and people having chops. I find that talking, for example, about chops is an essentialist idea that prioritizes certain things. There is nothing wrong about having technique. It's actually very, very important. But what do you want to use that technique for?
Okay.
It is a
That's
problem
a good point.
if you have if your music, for example, is pentatonic. Why would you be learning major scales, for example? You understand? I'm just giving a rough example.
True.
So I'm saying, and generally, people that set up these techniques are centering those technical things in European music, because the instruments that we have anyway are European. I am saying to check out your own chops should mean that you're working on something, not the standardized idea of chops, like maybe your Jimmy 84 or whatever. That it's the same, how they use the system to grade musicians. I think the idea, like I was saying, the idea of standardization, it actually conflicts with the idea of uniqueness.
Sure.
Because if I have something and you say it's universal, it's standardized, but it's unique at the same time, there's a problem about that.
Well, I think that's the issue with contemporary jazz now here. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yes. So I'm saying if I'm here in South Africa, and that's something I've argued for in my study, that it's funny how we do not want to learn technical abilities that helps us talk about our own music, that helps us talk about our own sound. You understand? Why would you want to go and play a fugue if you want to express yourself? You want to talk about your granny that's sweeping the floors and humming a tune. How is the fugue going to help to assist it? It's good to have information, but at a certain extent, music is not just an external influence, it's an internal influence. And I'm saying sometimes Most people fell by the wayside as music students because they find that every time they come to study the music, they have to play something that is other than themselves.
Okay, so there it is, y'all.
People can feel it.
There it is, y'all. Do you hear what Yonela just said? Here folks are expected to master a whole different kind of music and way of thinking and playing about music in order to even play their own music. And what he's saying is, nope, we do not have to do that. We need to develop musically within our own system of learning or transmission. I think that's what you're saying. I hear what you're saying, brother.
Because there will be authority. Now, when you want to learn something, people that come in the lineage after you begin to learn from something that you kind of like established. I mean, think about all the other guys. What about kora players? They're great, man. What about all the other African guys that are playing the drums? There is a learning system as well.
Well, see, that's what I was going to mention. The kora players, we have our own way of virtuosity. I mean, the Mandi Jollies, they're virtuosic. They have chops. I mean, in that sense, like they really know what they're doing. They have a way of teaching from generation to generation. So, and you know, brother, but now what do you think about this? With regards to the jazz musicians, I was trying to create or think about that parallel that we do that. If a father and son, if a father teaches his son kora, and we have a man named Jolly here from his family's from Senegal, Amadou Koyate, who plays kora. His father taught him, he teaches his children. So my question is, in the music though, to learn jazz, it's pretty much the way to do it is to listen to one or two specific people, and they become like your teachers.
Yes.
And you.
Well, in South Africa, I've got a chapter. I wish my work was already finalized.
Right.
There is a chapter. One of the first chapters that I do is how I want to study how South Africans learn. And I was saying that the few that were privileged to go to institutions, to kind of like your missionary churches, people from like your Salvation Army, to learn a little semblance of Western music. But what made our music more unique is that there has been a lot of mentorship from one musician to the other.
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily centered in a family, but it is much more advantageous when the music is in the family because it's easy to transfer skills. But here we help each other in general, what we call general brothership, in the sense that if you know a young player who's trying something, he comes to your house, you hang out, maybe you want some duties, or you just share little bits. But we have to befriend each other and form families amongst ourselves to kind of continue the tradition. I have benefited from that, from the fact that I went to the elders, and I went to their shows, and they've been able to be generous. And it's something. I mean, now I teach too. So, and the way we teach is not that kind of curriculum-based way of playing. I'm trying to make sure that whatever the music stimulus that is here, we appreciate it and like it, and show them how they can actually deepen their understanding of what they hear now, whether it's house music or whatever. Deepen it and show them what other guys have been doing, because it's all about helping someone continue their own quest.
Music and Culture, Sounds of the Black Experience with Maya Cunningham.